Hello, and welcome to Regrets I've Had a Few. I'm Paul Hunter, Artistic Director of Told by an Idiot, and this is a podcast where I talk to friends and colleagues delving into what made them the person they are today.
Hello, and welcome. My guest this month is one of the rising stars of his generation, equally at home directing Shakespeare, new writing, or Christmas shows. He also runs buildings. As Artistic Director of the Unicorn Theatre, he led the organisation through the pandemic and continued to redefine what theatre for young people and families could be. Now, new Artistic Director at Chichester, I, for one, can't wait to see what he's going to do. Welcome, Justin Audibert.
Hi, Paul. Thank you so much. Great to be invited.
Well, it's lovely to have you here. And obviously, we've worked together on several occasions, so I'm sure we'll touch on that at some point. But I will kick off, as I always do, by taking guests back to the very beginnings of things and asking when or how or where was your first kind of engagement with theatre or live performance, whether that's through family or school or did it come later?
Yeah, so I've got quite a good one of these. So my first, the first that I can remember, I'm pretty sure it'll be the first, was on my 5th birthday, being taken to the Kenneth More Theatre in Ilford to see the Sooty and Sweep show live by my grandma, and she had told them it was my birthday. So when it came to the bit where you go on, they have people up from the audience, I got to go up on stage and go, "Izzy, Wizzy, let's get busy," and wave the wand, and then a birthday cake appeared, and then everyone sang me happy birthday. So I'm pretty sure that that's probably what ended up being a theatre director. Does life ever get better than saying, "Let's get busy," and match your own birthday cake?
Oh, that's quite an extraordinary first show to see, and kind of interacting, immersive piece of performance that you were part of. It kind of will lead to a question later about performing that I have for you, but you've kind of touched on it already. Extraordinary. So were you born and raised in Ilford, Justice?
I was, yeah. I was born, yeah, that's right. I lived there until actually probably not long after that. So I think I'd done my first year of primary school, and then we moved to Croydon. So then I grew up like Haley, Carmichael, as we've talked about before, in Croydon. So I'm kind of, I think I'm a Croydonian really, because I was there from 6 to 18. So really, but yeah, no, that's where I was. I was born in Ilford, bless.
And it's interesting you talk about the Sooty and Sweep extravaganza exterior. Was that an isolated theatre trip, or did you go more with school or anything like that?
So basically, my family I would say, I think it probably worked out as twice a year. So pretty much, we always went to a pantomime at Christmas, and then we pretty much always went to a musical at some point in the year. And the pantomime, often my mum would arrange, but sometimes, like, my grandma took me to the Palladium. I remember seeing Frank Bruno.
Wow!
In a pantomime at the Palladium. Yeah, I remember doing that. And then the musical, it would tend to be like a classic musical, but we tend to go and see it. My auntie and uncle lived in the Midlands in Redditch, and we tend to go and see it at the Hippodrome.
Yeah,
it would tend to be like, I remember seeing My Fair Lady. I remember seeing Oliver. I remember seeing the Canterville Ghost with Ron Moody.
Wow.
Yeah. So it would those would tend to be the experiences I kind of had, and then I would be in the often I'd be in the school, like primary school play, and then when I was 11. For my 11th birthday, my auntie, who would often book the musical, she loved going to Stratford-upon-Avon to watch shows there. She went to, she was from Ilford as well, but she went to University in Aston, trained to be an optician. She started going to Stratford then to watch plays, get cheap student tickets, and often they were in the other place she would go. But she took me at 11 to see a production of, it's so strange now, Love's Labour's Lost, which I've looked this up, and I think it's Ian Judge directed it. And I couldn't tell you who was in it, but it was all set in like kind of Cambridge or Oxford. I'm not sure. It was like punting. Yeah, the kind of theme of it. Everyone was punting around left, right, side. I didn't even know what punting was. Obviously, why would you when you're 11? I just remember, like, it was in the RST, the old, the old RST, the massive demanding, but we must have had okay seats, I think, but it was huge. And I just remember, strangely, like, that was the thing that, like, I just remember the spectacle of it, and these like mechanized like boats going backwards and forwards, and just like love it. Like, I remember really vividly loving that. Not, I mean, I always liked the musicals, but I remember that, and I remember the challenge of the Shakespeare, and I remember that was a really, like, I would say that was a really formative experience. And then after that, my auntie would often take me she'd book tickets for like one Shakespeare thing a year as well. So I started going to Shakespeare because of that.
That's very interesting. And also the fact that, as you said, you're similar to me, your experience was, I didn't really see musicals, but certainly in Birmingham, used to go to the Hippodrome to see the pantomimes and stuff. And then slightly older than you had that thing of, because I was born in Birmingham, eventually there would be a school trip to Stratford.
Yeah.
And it's funny when you mentioned that particular production, which I didn't see, but I remember acting at the Barbican in the 90s, and they had lots of posters, and I can see a poster that looked like Brideshead Revisited.
Yeah, it looks exactly like that. Yeah,
for that vibe, which I'm sure must be that.
Yeah.
So that's quite I suppose a fairly early introduction to, and also it wasn't like Midsummer Night's Dream.
No,
quite complex poverty that you were dealing with, and then so you go to secondary school, and it is at what point does a kind of, often when I talk to guests, there is some kind of turning point. It might be a teacher or something that ignites the idea that, oh, maybe there's something in this. Did that happen for you in some way?
Yeah, so I think that's really true. So we had, I went to a state school, but it was a really academic state school, like really academic. It was really cool. Wilson's. It's a really good school. Slightly strange, all boys school, which difference. And we had a teacher who taught classics, is what he taught.
Wow.
Through the classics, you would do like Sophocles and Euripides and Aeschylus. I think we only did one Aeschylus. I think the rest of it was Sophocles and Euripides. And he would then do the school play as well and direct the school plays. His name was Jeff Shaw. And basically, so he did like Hiawatha, a stage version of Hiawatha. We did, when I was 16, we did John Ford's 'Tis Pity She's a Whore.
Wow.
Which is a mad play to do at 16.
Yeah.
And then we did a play called Ghetto, which was by Joshua Sobel.
Yes.
Nick Heitner directed at the National. So we did these like really heavy plays for kids to do. And I suppose on some level, I just loved doing that. And what I look back on now is, so I would be in them, but what I look back on now is he would often say like, oh, why don't you go and take those guys off and rehearse a bit? So I suppose I wasn't the assistant director, but I was a kind of unofficial assistant director, if that makes sense. Like, and I guess that was the thing, I would go off and like, do practice little bits with people, and I just like doing that. And so I suppose that was that. But I mean, full disclosure, like even at that point, I would have had no idea whatsoever that I would work in the theatre. Like, I don't know if I knew there were jobs in the theatre. Do you know what I mean?
No.
I would have known there were actors. But I'm like, well, I'm not even sure. Yeah, I suppose I would have known that there were stage managers. I don't think I would have known there were directors, for example, or even someone did the lights, but you don't know that's a job. Do you know what I mean? Like
it's an interesting thing, isn't it, when you begin to have a really strong feeling about performance or theatre, whatever. But as you say, you don't really know what people do or what roles are, or that someone is directing something. And thinking that theatre just kind of happens somehow.
Yeah.
And what was your feelings around performing there? Because I'm always interested when I speak to directors. At what point do you start to go, well, I'm not sure about this performance business, or did that carry on for a while?
So I went to university, and in Sheffield University, and again, like everything is a mixture of like, an interest and then the luck and the circumstances. So it just happened that in the same time as I was at university in Sheffield, there was James Grieve and George Perrin, who later went on to run Payne's Plough. There was Lucy Preble, obviously very famous player now. DC Moore, an actor, Simon Darwin, another producer called Paul Jallis, and Alan Lane, who runs.
Yes, Lane. Yeah.
And Alan was a couple of years above, and probably really, really important. I mean, I later lived with Alan, but probably really important in that, you know, he was in his third year when I was in my first year, and he kind of left and worked, you know, in a whole range of odd jobs in theatre. I think we found his company. So I still at university to start with acted, and we all did. And I think the thing that we were so lucky about, and the thing that I get, you know, you don't know it at the time, of course, but the way it worked in Sheffield was the Drama Society ran, but there was a theatre that was an old converted church, and there was a theatre manager, a guy called Ruben. But essentially, the Drama Society, you programmed and ran the theatre, but with that, it meant that, you know, you had to rig the lights and like put things back and coil the cables and do all that stuff. And actually, so even if you were acting, you had to turn up for the get in and the get out on a Sunday, and it wasn't like a choice. You know, you weren't in the society if you didn't do that. Yeah. And you realize, you know, and then like, you know, and then basically, you know, it was just, you know, if you were in a play, then the next play maybe you wouldn't be in it, but you'd be expected to do something. So like, you know, you might be the, in inverted commas, I'm doing air quotes here for the podcast, sound designer, you know, putting like a mini disc in and like taking a mini disc out, or, you know, or you do a lighting design. I remember doing one where LEDs had just like happened first thing, and like doing this whole lighting design. I mean, now I'm like, that must be the worst thing for the audience to watch. Just like color changing a psych, not the whole show. You're like, that must have been the most annoying thing to watch in the history. But, you know, so you learn to do, or stage manage, or produce, you know, or put the posters up or whatever. And I realize now that was the kind of formative, you know, that thing of like, actually, you just got to try and do it. That's, you know, that was so important. But I was in it when I first thought, I would quite like directing. I was in a play, a version of Sisterly Feelings, an Alan Ayckbourn play where the second half is determined by the toss of a coin. And I was playing the granddad in it. And we came off stage and on the last night, and I went to the show, and I was like, oh, that scene where we all passed around sandwiches, that was meant to be funny. And like, we'd done like a whole run of this play, and none of us had realized this whole scene was funny. And at that point I was like, well, if I'd worked that out, maybe I should have been directing the play rather than being in the play. And I remember that being the thing of me being like, direct a play, because I was like, I don't want to be, because, you know, because obviously, if something is meant to be funny and you're direct and it's not funny, it's just there. You know.
Yeah. Can't think of tell me about it. Just tell me about it. Just very aware of that. That's very interesting. Also, Sheffield has a very rich, you know, there's a very rich history of. I mean, Stephen Dolger went there, I think, and Eddie Izzard, and you know, there's obviously a culture there over the years. But interestingly, what you kind of described might sound weird, because obviously you're about to run one of the most prestigious theatres in the country, and you've already run one of the most. But what you're describing, in a sense, is maybe a slightly scaled down version of what running a building is. You say about putting the posters up, and I know, I mean, hopefully you won't have to go and put the posters up. I don't know, but it feels like a scaled down version of what it needs to run a building.
I'd never thought of that before, but yes, that is exactly what it is, right? Whereas actually, if you say if you went to a different place, say you did drama as your degree, you'd probably just spend all your time acting in the plays, and then you might go to drama school, or or you'd work or whatever. Yeah, I hadn't really thought about that, but yes. And it was like, you kind of had to you had to campaign and get votes for like to put the play on, and there's loads. I'd never thought of that.
But it's also an interesting thing, I think, because I never thought about directing at all. I was just desperate to be an actor, and I trained to be an actor. Yeah. And it was only by chance when we set Told By Minute that Haley, John, and I spoke at the very early days about saying, well, we should also be fluid around what our roles are. And we used to badger John to return to the stage, who hadn't been on stage for 20 years, and he'd always laugh and say, I'm not doing it. And then at one point, 3 or 4 shows in, I thought, actually, I'd quite like to direct this idea rather than being. So I'm very fortunate that the company allowed me the opportunity to ultimately do something that I love. But so once you leave Sheffield, you then decide you want to train specifically. Is that what took you to Birkbeck?
So kind of. So I took shows to like to Edinburgh Festival and stuff like that, and then I just didn't have a clue, because why, you just don't, do you? So I was a teacher for a couple of years.
Okay.
And then while I was there, a friend of mine did the Birkbeck course, which was very new. I was the 4th year.
Okay.
he was like the third year, and he said, you would love this. And so while I was doing teaching, I applied to do the course then. And that's what took me. And that's obviously how I then, so the first year of that course is like the talk classes. And then obviously that's how I met you and how I came to Idiot, because I was I was thrust upon you guys up in Leeds in that.
Yeah, brilliantly.
In that, in that slightly strange school that we were in rehearsing it, which was a very strange place to rehearse, but really fun. And obviously, that was, I mean, I talked about this before, but I think, and obviously most of the directing I have done, most of it is a text and then you direct it. But, it was obviously it was so vital to my development and changed the way I think about things, to work with you and to see you start with, not with that, with an idea and with performers and putting the performers at the center of a thing and collectively working out, how you're going to stage it. You very much directed it, but you took all the kind of views of everybody in the room into that. And, I'm, Ian Johnson and obviously Hayley or, all these people, everybody would be like, well, what about this? What about that? What about that? And obviously you were the arbiter of those ideas, but you did it in that kind of collaboration. And that was, for me, that was just the most vital thing to see. And I think that's how I do things, and obviously I've done little bits of devising and I've done, but that's been so seminal to me. And I suppose the other thing where I felt really lucky to work with you guys as well was because it was on like how much emphasis you guys placed on the transitions between stories, which is really fun. It's a funny thing to say, but actually that does so much of the work for the show. And it's amazing. Even now, I still go and see shows and I'm like, oh, you've done this brilliant scene, but your transition has killed that scene or killed the leap into the next scene. And you're like, how can that still be going on?
Well, thank you for that. I look back on that time with a real pleasure of being up there. And I also always like a room that has hopefully a real range of experience and different people in that room, which was great. I remember, one of my memories of that, and you were brilliantly positive around the whole situation, which is not always easy to do that. But I remember a very nerve-wracking rehearsal where we did have a writer attached, a great poet called Caroline Duffy. And she was sort of, didn't seem very interested in coming in to see what we were doing until one morning. I think I was chatting to you and then someone scurried over from marketing and said, Caroline Duffy's coming into rehearsal. And I remember thinking, oh my, because she's quite formidable when I've met her.
Yeah.
And you talk about the actors centre stage. I remember we were running a bit, I think there's a scene when Casanova, this is a production of Casanova in which we reinvent the character Casanova as a woman. Hayley played rather marvellously. And she goes to London and gets tricked by this young man and his father, and she loses all her money and stuff. We work on the sequence. And I couldn't really, it was you and me and Caroline Duffy sitting. And I thought, I can't really look, I was got to carry on. And then brilliantly, it's like the power of what Hayley was doing and all the other performers. She leant over and said to me about Hayley, she's very good. And I just put back God for Hayley. Because sometimes as the director, it's nerve-wracking, isn't it? It's like when you're in the rehearsal room and you first have to share something to other people, it's exposing. And it's exposing for the actors, but I always feel with my acting hat on, I've got something to do.
You can do it. You can do it. Directing. I've got there go.
You're like the football coach, the manager, who sets stuff up and can't do anything about it, and then the players have to go on and do it. That's very. It's interesting in the Birkbeck thing, because I've worked with quite a few directors who have come off that training, and I suppose this is a question I had: is there's obviously a kind of a way of looking at directing that comes from Birkbeck. How do you think you retain what is you and your way of looking at stuff, and how do you apply a lot of the things that you're learning, I suppose?
Yeah, really good question. So, I would say to Rob Swain, who founded the course along with Peter Cheeseman and has run the course since its inception. Rob is very good at going, look, I'm going to teach you I'm going to give you a set of tools, but how you apply them and the way in which you apply them is up to you, and it has to be up to you. So he's very clear about that. I'm not saying that everyone always takes that, and people do get into these things where like, no, this is the right way. But he sets that out, I think, very clearly. I think the thing that you get from Birkbeck that is the really, like, incredibly valuable is vernacular, like learning the different ways that you talk to the other collaborators, the lighting designer, the sound designer, the video designer, the set designer, the actors, all I think that's the thing that I, above anything else, took from it. Like, that was just so useful, because actually, and I suppose also going that I know this sounds so basic now I say it, but the idea that, unless you communicate clearly with all those departments, well, whatever's in your brain is not going to happen on the, in 3 dimensions, because nobody can look inside your brain very clearly.
I don't think that's basic at all, Justin. I think that communication is so central. I'm so surprised sometimes that in a world that is about communicating, people are very poor at communicating. Completely, right?
Well, I was talking to assistant and an emerging artist. I'd hate that term. You know what I mean? Someone who's making their way in the industry. And I said, when, and I'm sure you would have been even worse. Like, I would have had it a little bit better. But like, artistic directors used to be like, they would not talk to you, would they, Paul? No. I mean, like, you would just be like, like they wouldn't communicate, or they kind of, there was an element of fear, or like, intimidation, or they'd be whisked away, or, they were really, it used to be such a strange thing. And I can't say that, I can't meet everybody that approaches me, but I try to communicate with most people. You go, it's so strange, that, and I think that culture has shifted a lot. I mean, like, that shifted an awful lot, but it was, at that point, it, really was this kind of madly hierarchical thing where, and because of that, those artistic directors didn't feel the need to communicate, and spell stuff to people, and it was very odd.
I think that's very true. Before we go on to talk a little bit about your sort of professional career, we're always looking to develop our work, and the podcast is no exception. So we're creating a new element for it called Ask an Idiot, where we have opened it out to the public who have a question for our guests. So without further ado, Justin, here's our question.
Hello, my name is Ben Haslam, and I'd like to ask Justin, given the rich history of Told by an Idiot shows inspired by real people, which person do you think would make a good subject for a show, and why?
This is such a great question. And my answer is, because Told by an Idiot have always been centered on the performer, and that's the starting point of how they make shows. And I've looked, I was thinking about this, the shows that, all the shows, full disclosure, by the way, as well as, so I was Paul's assistant and his associate, and I also was on the board of Told by an Idiot as well. So I've seen quite a bit of Told by an Idiot's work. But because they are always focused on, and then, the real people they've done range from Casanova to Boris Vian to, Mrs. Slocum. No, not a real person, fictional person. But for a range of people. But the person that I think they should think about tackling is Quintus Roycius Gallus, who was the most famous was the kind of first acting superstar in ancient Rome. I mean, I was desperately hoping to find a woman in this, but I couldn't find a female famous Roman actor. But basically, Quintus Roycius Gallus was this mega star. Like, people would pay thousands of sesterces to watch Gallus. And I imagine that Told by an Idiot would do a very, very funny version of this, of his biography. I mean, probably Haley playing it amazingly, probably. So that's the one I'm going to chuck in your way, because also Told by an Idiot have never done anything in the Greco-classical world, or I couldn't. I not that I know.
No,
maybe I'm wrong.
No, I don't think we did. So that you've already started my research. I've written the name down incorrectly, but I will be looking into that. That's extraordinary. It's funny what you say about women. The one thing that a good friend of mine a while ago, Mike Shepherd, said, because we were talking about the play, Tanika Gupta's play about Queen Victoria.
Yeah.
And he said, I'd like to see you play Queen Victoria. And I sort of laughed. And then I thought, actually, yeah, that'd be great. I wouldn't mind having a go. Obviously, I think I'm late Queen Victoria. But I'm now obviously moving from Queen Victoria to Quintus Roycius Gallus. That's a brilliant answer and very inspiring. So you leave Birkbeck, you assist, you whatever, and then of course you very quickly start to make your own way. And I've always, I suppose, it's an interesting thing where I'm thinking of two productions. If I take two that I really enjoyed, one of which was the Jew of Malta that you did at the RSC with Jasper Britton, and I thought it was terrific. Of a play that I barely knew. I think I'd seen one reading of it at the Globe, and it's very rarely done. But obviously, it was terrific, and I thought the theatre of the evening was wonderful. And I think too often, I think I remember Simon Burney saying this, that you can see a play you don't know very well, as Shakespeare perhaps or whatever, and you don't know whether it's a very good play because the theatre isn't very good, if that makes sense. And sometimes I'm too quick to say, someone says, was that a good play? And I go, oh no, not really. And then I think, well, I don't know actually. I think about it. If the theatre had been somehow of the evening and all the elements, and I thought you did an amazing kind of job on that. And then also the Box of Delights at Wilton's, which is a wonderful adaptation of a children's story. And I suppose my question is, which I think is some maybe directors always are considering, what would you say are the elements that you retain production to production, things that you go, I'm always going to do this, and what changes dependent on the piece you're dealing in?
Well, that's a great question. So, I the thing, like everyone, when you first get the opportunity to make your own shows, you sometimes, well, no, not sometimes, I made a decision I would try most things because I was like, I don't know what I like, and I feel like it's iterative, so you kind of try different genres and different things. And then after a while, I kind of did that for a bit, and some of those went well, and some of those didn't go so well, because you're working out where your strengths and talents lie. And then after a while, I kind of settled on I suppose, two kind of principles to taking on. One was, do I think with this show I can, this show can express something about the way I feel, and I do things about feel, not about what I think, but what I feel about the world in the moment that we're in. So the Jew of Malta is a really good example of that. Obviously, it's a play very much about religious tension and interreligious rivalry and all that kind of stuff. And then the other thing, the other thing is, is there something theatrically inherent in the piece that is like, which is more than just like watching a slice of everyday life. So they're the two things that I guess I'm interested in. And I suppose what Box of Lights has literally like phoenixes appearing from everywhere, like, it's absolutely bonkers. So those are the two things that I really try and, look for. And I would say that's in most of the work I've done, most of the work I've done at the Unicorn as well. One of the things that I love about being a theatre director is like kind of adding to the kind of layer of different layers of skills that there are. So Box of Delights, one of the things I loved about that was actually getting to work. I'd never really done a show with video, and actually I'd always been quite skeptical of theatre shows with video, but getting to work with Nina Dunn and kind of her really understanding that I didn't want it to be literal, I wanted to do something expressive with it. That was just brilliant. And that thing of just continually, I think about that a lot. Like, we're really lucky. We get to work with just such talented people who bring it, who take the idea from your head and do a better version of it, right? So that is a really big thing. So like the new thing would be trying to add a new skill, and that might be, that's been like in the past, that's been, street dance or, whatever. New layer to the thing that I'm doing is, I always feel like, but it would always go back to, do I genuinely think, this says something about how I feel about the world? I would say that. And that might be, with Box of Lights, actually, I think the power of imagination is the greatest gift. It's not going to be something new each time, if you know what I mean, but it's just like that. It has to have that in it. And when I haven't done shows that have been maybe as good as, maybe because I just, that there's a slight disconnect, between those two things, and that's on, I think that, even with really brilliant actors who are, giving it their all, if you're not quite able to like give that kind of spark of real inspiration, that's not the right word, but that they know what it is they're working towards, then it kind of falls flat. I mean, that's how I've always found it anyway.
Yeah, no, does
that make sense?
It does make sense. And I think also you touch on there where you're talking about the world of video and the person you work with. You touch on, for me, something that's so crucial when I'm directing, which is the same with acting. But I often think people say, how do you find, as one of the few people who still do both, act and direct, until someone tells me, I don't want to see you on stage anymore, or I don't want to see you on your place to direct, I'm going to continue doing both.
Queen Victoria is your career ender, Paul.
Exactly, yeah. Career-defining role. I think it's also about responsibility, because I genuinely think as a performer, you shouldn't carry too much responsibility. I'm being a bit flippant now, but I think your responsibility is to turn up on time, to be open, to learn lines if there are some, although I think that can be overrated. And as a director, you inevitably carry more responsibility. Of course you do. People are looking to you. But I think that sense of collaboration becomes even more crucial, I think, for me as a director. Who is around me? Who am I working with? And like you say, when it's not just about people you return to, but it's the new people for me that come into the mix where I go, oh, I'm suddenly working with a choreographer that I didn't know at all. And, I totally get what you're saying. I've got a couple of more things I want to ask. Some of them are ludicrous in one way, but if you could start rehearsals tomorrow on any play to direct, what would you want to do?
Wow, that is an absolutely brilliant question. Okay, so
at this moment in time.
Okay, so I've got this really fun idea for a Midsummer Night's Dream that's set in the kind of 1989 Summer of Love, second Summer of Love, in the free rave era. But I mean, everybody's doing Midsummer Night's Dream, so I don't know if I could do it. I think it would be a great setting for Midsummer Night's Dream. So that has been ticking around my head with me going, oh, it would be perfect. And obviously, because it's warm at the moment and it's fun, but everybody's doing Midsummer Night's Dream, so I probably wouldn't do that. I think, what would I love to do? There's a really great play that I've long thought should have another life, and I don't have quite the right idea for it, but it's Barry Records' play Skivers.
Oh, my!
Do you know it? Which is Barry Record was he was Jamaican playwright who came to the UK in the 50s. And Skivers, he was a teacher for a bit while he was here, and it's set in a classroom with these kids that just basically are, they don't want to learn, they don't want to, they've basically been let down by the system, and they really they're running wild. And I've always wanted to tackle that. I don't think it's been done for a long time, but there's something about where we're at the moment.
Yeah.
Public service is all, in a bad place, and this sense, a real anger and a real fire to it. But it's fun. The kids are funny, they're funny, but they're, and yeah. So maybe that.
Sounds timely. I often ask actors what if there's one role they could play, what would it be? And I suppose, and you can have the choice of spotlight and everything like that. If you could direct one actor at the moment, who would it be?
That is amazing.
And it can be Hollywood, it could be Bollywood. It doesn't matter where it is.
So who would I? So on stage, right?
On stage.
Who would be my one actor on stage that I would like to do? Well, so I have heard, I think you'd have to do this because it would just be fascinating to do. I have heard that Tom Hanks is hankering to do some stage acting. So I think you'd have to, right? You'd have to want to do it, because you'd be like, I mean that, and obviously I'm sure he's absolutely amazing, but I don't know, and he hasn't been on stage for a very long time.
Well, if you get that phone call, then that's
yeah.
There's an actor as an actor, I suppose, someone that I find very fascinating. I've only seen him on screen, but I think he started his life as a dancer, so I think he's performed on stage. Who I adore is Mads Mikkelsen.
Oh wow,
he's kind of one of my favourite actors, and I kind of thought, even if I could just be a small part in something with him. I think he's amazing. Justin, it's been so brilliant as ever to chat with him. We haven't had the chance for a while, so partly selfishly, I've really enjoyed the last 40 minutes and actually, obviously, discover stuff I didn't know at all. I think you've done a brilliant job at the Unicorn, and I think it's so exciting that you moved to Chichester. So I wish you all the best for that. I always finish with 7 random questions, which my guests asked the answer to see it comes into their head. So here we go: James Brown or Miles Davis?
Miles, just very hard.
The North or the South?
Oh, I like both. Sorry for saying on the fence.
Okay, that's fine.
I'm very Yorkshire. I'm very Yorkshire, man.
Well, I thought Ilford and Sheffield.
So I'm very Yorkshire. I'm very London. Yeah.
Croydon, Sheffield. That's fine. To choose between these two things: cancelling a press night or going on stage as the director with the book.
Oh, Paul, I went on stage as Marmalade the cat in Pinocchio, so I've never cancelled.
No worries. I'm glad you're not a director who likes to cancel, who constantly is cancelling the show. That's very good. Taxi driver or do the right thing?
Oh, do the right thing, probably.
Carol Churchill or Sarah Kane?
Carol Churchill, yeah.
If you had to choose another job within the world of sport, would you go for boxing referee or cricket umpire?
I mean, it's no comparison. Cricket umpire would be my job.
Much safer as well.
Yeah.
And finally, leap before you look or look before you leap.
Oh, I think I'm leap before you look. Yeah. I've got through life like saying yes to stuff. So yeah.
I think you're leap before you look as well, Justin. Thanks ever so much. Have a great day, Justin. See you soon.
Thanks, Paul. You too. Take care. See you soon.
Dear listeners, if you've enjoyed this idiot podcast, please spread the word